And now we're going to move on to the hierarchy of need as it relates to childhood sexual abuse. Welcome to part 3. Before we get into it, I just want to recap parts 1 and 2. So in part 1 we learned that 63,000 children a year are sexually assaulted and that 80% of the perpetrators are the parents. We also learned that there are some 60 million adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse, 20% of the American population, 90% who never report. In part 2, we discovered through my voice how religious attitudes and teachings can have a negative impact on the victim of childhood sexual abuse, even well into adulthood. In this part 3, we're going to link childhood sexual abuse to the process of growth using 2 pyramids and some science. But before we begin that, I must add this disclaimer. I'm not a scientist, nor am I a psychologist, and I'm not a therapist. I am, however, an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse. My goal here is to raise awareness about the effects of such in a real-world, personal way. I'm putting a face to the studies and the statistics. Okay, so here is Maslow's hierarchy of need pyramid. Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist who was best known for creating this hierarchy of needs. This hierarchy of needs is a theory that posits that the fulfillment of innate human needs is predicated on the psychological health from the day a person is born. Now, as we all know, children are needy. There's basic needs. These are the physiological needs: food, water, warmth, rest. These physiological needs do not end at any time during life. We need these things throughout life, period. If we don't get these basic necessities from the day we're born, well, then survival is basically limited. So we have these physiological needs that are met. And now, in this hierarchy, the physiological needs are obviously the foundation of life. And the second tier, that's the safety needs. Now, in a home where the physiological needs are being properly met, the child learns to feel safe and secure. This progresses to the next level: belonging and love needs. A child whose physical needs are being met feels safe and secure and develops a sense of belonging and learns to feel loved. This in turn provides the foundation for esteem. Self-esteem empowers the child to strive to accomplish things. Self-esteem is what motivates the child to achieve. Now, in Maslow's theory, this is pretty much where we are as adults. But that next level, the self-actualization, this is where we fluctuate between these needs, okay? Because we're always striving to achieve, and none of us ever really reaches our full potential. None of us. But there's another side to this theory. In self-actualization theory, when one reaches the full potential, we're better able to help others. And that is the basic motivation of the self-actualization. You self-actualize. You basically know yourself and you've achieved everything you've wanted, and therefore you can give. That's the basic theory. Now, moving on. This is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Pyramid, or ACEs for short. ACEs began as a 2-year study in 1995 conducted by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. The study surveyed more than 17,000 HMO members from Southern California using a 10-point questionnaire to examine the relationship between early exposure to adverse childhood experiences and later health and well-being. At the base of the pyramid we find the adverse childhood experience. For our purposes, this is going to be child sexual abuse. And as you move up the pyramid, you can see that abuse disrupts neurodevelopment, impairs social, emotional, cognitive development, which can lead to the adoption of risky behaviors such as alcohol and drug use, promiscuity, and such. And these risky behaviors can then lead to disease, disability, and of course social problems. And then these can lead ultimately to an early death. Now if you look at the arrow at the right there, notice how it starts at conception. Adverse childhood experiences sometimes begin there or within the first years of life, and as you can see, can have a very detrimental effect on the developing child. Okay, looking at these two pyramids side by side, we can see the progressive growth that should be and what it actually is in the life of a traumatized child. If sexual abuse is present, there will more than likely also be the physical abuse, mental, emotional, and psychological abuse as well. It is the safety needs in the ACEs, the hierarchy pyramid. This is where childhood sexual abuse interrupts the life process. So once the abuse occurs, and especially when the abuser is the parent, there is no safety, there is no security. There's like nowhere to go. Where does a child go? Who does he tell? And the abuser will use lies, fear, and direct threats to life and limb to the victim and to those closest to the victim. And a child has very much trouble processing these threats and this lack of safety. The hierarchy of need is interrupted early on. And without the safety and security, belonging becomes a challenge, esteem becomes a challenge. The child will grow through life without these belonging needs, without the love, without the esteem. So once that safety and security is interrupted, it interrupts the entire hierarchy of need. Okay? And here we have what I call the pyramid of the adult survivor. I took the two pyramids, the hierarchy of need and the ACEs pyramid, and combined them into what I feel looks like the adult survivor experience. So what I've done here, I've taken out the physiological needs, and that's based on the assumption that those needs are in fact being met. Now, in adverse childhood experiences, however, even the physical needs are sometimes denied, so keep that in mind. But the ACEs second tier, the disrupted neurodevelopment part. Neurodevelopment is defined as the brain's ability to develop the neurological pathways responsible for the normal functioning of the brain's ability to learn, focus, develop memories, and social skills. So basically, it's the way the brain develops and contributes to one's outlook on the world. For the abused child, this means navigating danger where there shouldn't be any. The child's brain cannot process this danger in his or her early stages of development, so the brain goes into survival mode. And this is what I call developmental survival. Psychologists and scholars call it developmental trauma. Now, survival is not a learned behavior. It is an instinct. We all have a survival instinct. We were born with it. So when this child experiences this trauma, the brain goes into survival mode because there's danger. There's no safety, there's no security, but there's survival, period. And the child, being unable to stop the abuse, goes into this survival mode. Okay? In developmental survival, danger is ever present. And when danger is ever present, a child is always on high alert. when things change unexpectedly, a child might act out. That sudden change, it means danger. Or they might shut down. The child's reaction would depend on the survival mechanisms developed during the trauma. The child does not decide which survival mode he's going to use. This isn't a choice. This is the brain's way of saying, I need to protect myself, and this is how I'm going to do it. So the survival mode kicks in, and then it begins to develop as a norm, as a way of life. And the survival mechanisms that the brain decides on are no more voluntary than breathing or growing. So developmental survival comes in response to a trauma. And for the child, this becomes a normal way of life. So if you're looking at this pyramid, you see the safety and security and the neurodevelopment. Those are interrupted and are developed within the survival. There is no development without the survival. Okay? The developmental survival has already kicked in. It cannot be changed without intervention. And that's what the ACEs study does try to help us do. I'm trying to help us do that too by explaining the experience of the adult survivor so we get a better picture of what it looks like. So in all of this survival, there's the social, emotional, and cognitive development also, and then there's the belonging and love needs. Those things are affected by this developmental survival. Everything that happens from the time the child is traumatized right through adulthood is developed within developmental survival. The risky behaviors that are adopted for survival. That's what it is. It is survival. So you've learned to survive. And basically, that is what life is about, survival. And you get to be an adult, and you're doing all these things, and some things don't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. Yeah. The risky behaviors that you're taking, are wrong, but you do them anyway. And why? Because that's your instinct. It is your survival. That's how you have learned how to survive. And by the time you get to a point where, okay, there's some disease or disability, you're having social problems, by the time you get to that point, okay, you are so ingrained in your survival mode that undoing it takes the rest of your life, because it took a lifetime to grow it, and now you have to take the time to unlearn it. So you have to undo all that, and it is possible to do that, but in that self-actualization part where the child who wasn't abused comes into that self-actualization and achieves everything they want, and they're out there to try to help somebody, the self-actualization in developmental survival means I have to tell people because everybody needs to know. Okay, this is all more survival, because if I don't tell, somebody else is going to suffer. So this self-actualization part of life is where we finally come to terms with, okay, we have been traumatized. Okay, we can undo what was done in some form or fashion and come into a life of abundance as opposed to a life of survival. This is not an easy task for an adult. It's like trying to ride a bike for the first time. And not knowing what a pedal is. Okay, so here is a list of some of the long-term effects. It is by no means exhaustive. There's guilt, shame, and blame. The person who has experienced childhood sexual abuse feels guilty, they feel ashamed, and they blame themselves. But there's one thing that needs to be understood about these particular words, guilt, shame, and blame. Children don't use them. They have definitions for the words, but not the actual words. Children don't say, I feel guilty or ashamed. They say things like, I'm dirty, or nobody loves me, or I'm ugly. Children don't use the word blame either. They say, it's all my fault. Or they may even offer a fearful, I'm sorry. But moving down the list, the adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse has trouble with intimacy. They don't get close to people. They can be standoffish, hard to approach. They have low self-esteem. They might wear baggy clothes like I did, not so they don't bring attention to their bodies. But for most of my adult life, or at least my married life, I wore clothes that were 4 to 5 times my actual size. I was actually, or I am actually, a size 0. And I used to wear clothes 3, 4, and 5, 6. But it never occurred to me that I was hiding my body. I was just the average female with body issues. But what I didn't realize is that my body issues had everything to do with sexuality, and I was ashamed of it. So I hid my body. And if we move on down the list, the victim of childhood sexual abuse may be promiscuous. And some people I know, you frown on this and it's not right, but it's so much easier to get through life even if we have to pretend someone loves us for a little while. Next on the list is anxiety and depression. Now, you don't have to be a victim of childhood sexual abuse to be diagnosed with these mental disorders, but as the ACEs study confirms, childhood sexual abuse and ACEs in general can lead to these disorders. And in the black community, it becomes a challenge when there's anxiety or depression. Anybody suffering from these disorders might be told to suck it up or get over it or simply to just move on. And none of these are possible with anxiety and depression. They're mental disorders. Now, if something isn't working right in, say, your car, you take it to a mechanic to get fixed. When you get physically sick, you go to the doctor. But when your mind has a problem, where do you go? What do you do when your mind has a problem? And in the black community, we tend to look to our ancestors, our slave ancestors in particular. If they could survive all of that so that we can stand today, then surely you can handle some depression and anxiety. But then there's these flashbacks. Now, flashbacks we normally associate with post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. In the case of childhood trauma, it's usually an extended period of trauma. So they've coined a term called complex post-traumatic stress. And just like in the PTSD, where soldiers have flashbacks, adult survivors have flashbacks also. Now, the biggest difference with the flashbacks for the adult survivor is that many times they're emotional flashbacks. So the feeling that you're feeling right now feels what you felt back then, and you react and respond to that feeling. And you'll find yourself saying you're overreacting, you're being too dramatic, or just being plain confused by the reaction, like what is wrong with you? These are emotional flashbacks, and they're sometimes hard to identify, especially by the person experiencing them, because the reaction is to something that's happening now. But it's also a feeling of what happened back then. So it's all this history that comes rushing to the front, and it explodes out of this person. And it just looks strange. but it's a survival mode. It's what happens when developmental survival grows up with this child. So there isn't another way, because it's all the adult knows. It's adult been this way. This is just the way I am. Can't change it. And then there's that blame thing that comes back. You understand this is all your fault. I'm no good. I can't do anything right. And it all comes rushing back. And it's a flashback. And it hurts. So you turn to the alcohol, you turn to the drugs, you do anything and everything you can just to numb that pain, because it hurts. Now, alcohol and drug use is not always addictive, but long-term use can lead to addiction. But nobody wakes up one day and says, I want to be addicted to a drug. And in fact, for the adult survivor who has turned to drugs or alcohol, the addiction exasperates the problem, because it solidifies that I'm just no damn good thought process. So it's not a deliberate thing to go out and become an alcoholic, but there is the deliberate, I need to numb the pain. It's all part of survival. You'll find a lot of cases where alcohol and drugs are merely a symptom of the person's problems, not the actual problem. And if we continue to treat the addiction as the problem, as opposed to addressing the underlying issues, the self-medication and the coping mechanisms are going to come back. And again, solidifying that I'm no good thinking and creating a vicious cycle. So we don't want to condemn a person who happens to be addicted to a drug or alcohol or sex or gambling or shopping. We want to look at it as a symptom of a problem, a larger problem. So when you come across a person who happens to be in that state, if they're in the addictive state, you want to have empathy. You want to help them to feel safe, so that they have a chance to get well, and well in more ways than one. And you have to understand that this is a person who doesn't trust anybody. When they were a child, no one came to rescue them. They couldn't tell anybody. They were threatened with bodily harm or the harm of someone they loved. And this is what they grew up believing. It has a direct effect on the adult life. So who does this person trust? Where does this person go? And for those with the religious upbringing, their understanding is that God himself said that what happened to you is wrong and you could go to hell. And this is how this child grows and becomes the adult survivor. It is living hell. And if you're looking at this picture, you can see I've made the analogy of the boulders. It can be too much. Who carries around boulders? Hell, who can even lift one? That boulder doesn't go away by itself. It doesn't just fall. It doesn't just go, fall by the wayside or disappear. It doesn't shatter or anything else. It stays. It doesn't go anywhere. Once the trauma occurs, and especially when it's a long-term trauma, long-term abuse, that boulder just grows and grows and grows. And sometimes, for some people, the fight becomes too much, and suicide becomes an option. And because it hurts. We don't really want to die, but we don't know how to live. And it's up to me, up to us, me as an adult survivor, you as a person who loves an adult survivor, you as a person who loves a child, to avoid all this. It is up to us to stop this madness. It is up to us to stop this madness. And now I'm going to offer you up a few poems from my perspective. I'll explain these boulders. I will give you a picture of what it feels like as an adult survivor. Now, here you see 3 boulders. That's a pretty good representation of how I feel. But there are 3. And this poem is about the 3 boulders. The name of this poem, I Am They. And here we go. I am an author, I shouted, smiling brightly. I am an author, smiling with glee, feeling gloriously accomplished. Almost as if I could see a future without the past. Part of me knew this could not last. But I pressed forward, feeling bold. This feeling will never get old. Holding tightly to the newness of my courageous new self-awareness. Wait! Who's where? Who can see? The oldness that is me. They're going to laugh. They're going to sneer if I allow myself just to be. The darkness of them came rushing like a whirlwind, spinning me around to reveal the cage that I'm still in. Never knowing or understanding Maya Angelou's cage bird singing, the darkness of that cage, the silence of the rage, the reality of the stage. Who's turning the goddamn page? Me! My mind shouts. No, it's you! There is no doubt. And there I am, torn asunder, in confidence and fear, standing in wonder. Stay or go? We ask. Can't decide, so we just say no. Close our eyes and we can't see the cage from which we are now free. The darkness of they, I find, is the we of my own mind. I'm free in a cage surrounded by my own rage. I am they, the free and the caged. This one is called The Dark. It was originally called What Drunk Looks Like. Yeah. Another night of dark, another night forgotten, another not remembered. When will it end? The dark is my day, the day is my dark, the night is the mark, always having its way. It falls as a shadow, consuming as it does, always bringing that which was, breaking you just because. Cannot this dark find a new place to park? Cannot this dark bring me a new heart? The darkness of me is the challenge to overcome, that thing that they see, but to it they never succumb. I have seen that dark,
It holds a place deep, only coming unawares, catching, holding, trying to keep. Its only place to hide is way down deep inside. The dark breaks the light with power and might. Say nothing to the dark, allow it no spark, for it has no needs, but on you it feeds. Your life isn't yours. When the dark shadow comes, your life hides somewhere as your whole body numbs. The dark has control, for it lives in your soul. Leaping out like a fire, quenching its own desire. Welcome to the dark. Okay, this next piece is called Shattered. Shattered. That's what this is. That's the feeling inside, pieces of life broken in a tide. The wave of misery, the cloak of shame, the shatter of blame. Shattered pieces all the same. Shattered, that's the look. Shattered, PTSD's present hook. Shattered, all pain and fury. Shattered, all shame, no glory. Shattered, rising in pieces. Shattered, damn it, the sting of many bees in. Piercing the soul as inside thunder rolls, churning shards of the shatter onto the heart of the matter. Shattered. Can you not see? Each and every goddamn piece is a shattered piece of me. And this one is called The Sounds of Depression. The days are, this day is. As I grow smaller, the pain grows louder. The tears stream, the thoughts scream. The heart races to nowhere like a dream. Running, screaming, running, shouting. No more keeping score. The deed be damned, can't look at my own hand. Though it is mine all the same, can't hide the shame. The days are, this day is. As I grow smaller, the pain grows louder. With each passing hour, overbearing silence is the power. Running, running, screaming, tears streaming, scars gleaming. Falling, calling, life is stalling. The weight of it holds heavy as pain breaches the levee. The dam breaks out, fuck you, it shouts. Running, screaming, falling, shouting, boldly daring, the crowd staring, the blinded seeing eyes, the judgment not far behind. From you I run, at you I scream, to you I call, as into darkness I fall. Unheard, unseen, bleeding heartbeats, unfree. Thank you for listening. Part 3 was a little harsh in some ways, in a lot of ways. When you talk about childhood sexual abuse, childhood trauma in general, we tend to, there's a lack of understanding about it. So I do hope that in listening to all of this, that you have a greater understanding of what happens in the life of a person who experiences childhood trauma. Now, when we talk about childhood sexual abuse, there are many, many things that we can do to overcome this. We can stop it, actually, but we have to talk about it. And that's what this whole series is about. And part 3 is about talking about it, talking about what happens and how it affects us. And me personally, how it affected me personally. So putting a face to this absolute avoidable tragedy is my way of helping us to come to terms with the fact that this has happened in the past, that we can stop it. We have the ability to say no more. Okay? We have the ability to just say no. And for children out there who are suffering, they need our voice. They need us. They need us to speak. So I'm speaking now to bring light to this problem so that you can speak on behalf of a child who may be suffering. They need us. Children need our voice. And in the next part that we get to, I'm going to explain how we can do that. I've been leading up to it from part 1 to this part 3, and we're going to talk about what we can do to stop this madness, because we need to stop this madness. We don't need to give the good person the free pass anymore. We don't have to be silent about it anymore. I'm not being silent about it anymore because I can't be silent anymore, because I'm in that stage of self-actualization where I know trauma happened. I know I've suffered, but I also know I didn't do it to myself. So when we get together, when we start speaking together and we start bringing awareness to everybody, when we start talking about sex the way we need to talk about sex, we can stop childhood sexual abuse. And for those that would be out there and do it, we can punish them the way they deserve to be punished. We don't need to put them on a list. We don't need to put them on a list, but they do need to be punished. And if they are punished, they will be on a list. Ours. Let's stop the madness. Thanks for your time. I look forward to seeing you in part 4.